The last thing my son said before he drove off was, "You're not my responsibility anymore." Then the dust swallowed his SUV. The desert was so quiet I could hear my own pulse in my ears. No buildings, no traffic, no cell signal, just heat waves dancing above the asphalt like ghosts. 70 years old, 3 states away from home, and my only child had just left me on the side of a highway like broken furniture. But what Daniel didn't know was that I'd already heard everything, and by the time he walked back into that house, he would understand exactly who he'd tried to betray. I didn't scream when he drove away. That's the part people always ask about. They expect panic, begging, tears. But when you've spent 45 years waking up at 4:30 a.m. to work steel shifts in Gary, Indiana, you learn something about endurance. The sun pressed down on my shoulders like a hand trying to force me to kneel. Sweat slid into my collar. The air tasted metallic. I checked my phone. No signal. Exactly like I knew it would be. Daniel had chosen this stretch carefully. Route 54 outside Tucumcari, New Mexico. Sparse traffic. Dead zone for miles. He thought he was being clever. He forgot who taught him how to plan. If you're listening to this from somewhere warm tonight, maybe Texas, Arizona, Nevada, desert heat doesn't just burn your skin, it tests your mind. And Daniel was counting on mine to fail first. He didn't know I'd already made a different calculation. And in less than 2 hours, he would start calling. The first mile is always the hardest. Not because of the distance. Because of the betrayal replaying in your head. I adjusted my cap and started walking east, staying close to the thin strip of gravel between asphalt and desert scrub. My knees complained, but they'd complained for 20 years. Payne and I were old coworkers. I rationed my breathing the way I used to ration overtime paychecks. Slow, measured, controlled. Daniel thought I'd panic, but panic wastes water. And I had exactly 2 bottles tucked inside the inner lining of my jacket sewn there 3 nights before we left Indiana. You don't prepare like that unless you already know. The desert shimmered ahead like it was laughing at me. Heat rising in waves. No clouds. No shade except for the occasional road sign casting a narrow strip of mercy. Mile marker 118 passed. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. Good. That meant he hadn't found the note yet. When he did, when he read what I left taped behind the refrigerator magnet his mother loved, that's when the real heat would begin. Tell me something. If your own child betrayed you like that, would you confront them immediately? Or would you wait until they realized they were the ones trapped? By mile 2, the first truck roared past. Didn't slow down. Didn't need to. I wasn't stranded. I was repositioning. And Daniel had no idea what was already set in motion back home. By mile 3, the memories started talking louder than the wind. Daniel, at 7 years old, sitting cross-legged on our garage floor in Hammond, holding a flashlight while I changed brake pads on the old Ford F-150. "Hold it steady, Dad," he'd say, like he was the supervisor. Back then, I was his hero. Funny how admiration turns into inconvenience when you get old. The sun climbed higher. My shirt clung to my back. I took one small sip of water, not enough to satisfy thirst, just enough to remind my body I was still in control. Control. That's what this was about. Not survival. Control. Because the real story didn't start on this highway. It started 5 nights earlier. When I couldn't sleep and went downstairs for water, that's when I heard Daniel and Melissa whispering in the kitchen. Low voices. Urgent. I almost went back upstairs. Almost. But something in his tone stopped me. Not anger. Not frustration. Calculation. If you've ever heard someone talk about you like you're already gone, you know the sound. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. And what I recorded that night is the only reason I'm walking this road instead of dying on it. Another mile marker passed. Still no signal. Good. Because once those bars came back, Daniel's phone would start vibrating, and it wouldn't stop. I still remember the exact sentence that froze my blood. Out there, nobody would even question it. Daniel said it casually, like he was discussing weather. Melissa's voice followed, softer but sharper. Heat stroke, confusion. He wanders. It happens all the time with seniors. Seniors. That's what I had become in their house. Not Dad. Not the man who paid his tuition at Purdue. Not the one who co-signed the first car loan. Just a category. I stood halfway down the staircase that night, barefoot against cold hardwood, my phone shaking in my hand as I opened the voice recorder. I didn't confront them. Didn't slam doors. didn't demand explanations, because anger gives away advantage. Instead, I let them keep talking about life insurance, about selling the house in Crown Point, about finally being free. That recording is 6 minutes and 11 seconds long. I've listened to it exactly twice. Once that night, and once this morning before we left Indiana. The desert wind picked up, pushing against my chest like it was testing me. 4 miles in now. Sweat burned my eyes, but my breathing stayed steady, because Daniel believed I was the weak variable in his equation. He forgot something important. I may be 70, but I raised him. And if you've ever taught someone how to think strategically, you know exactly where their blind spots are. The horizon shimmered. Then, one faint bar of signal flickered onto my screen. Right on schedule. I smiled. Now it begins. The first vibration came 3 seconds after the second signal bar appeared. Then, another. Then 3 in a row. I didn't answer. I just kept walking. The desert stretched flat and merciless around me, but inside my pocket, Daniel's world was collapsing. By the time I reached mile marker 113, the phone had buzzed 12 times. I stopped beneath a faded Route 66 sign, letting its narrow shadow cut across my shoulders. I pulled the phone out slowly. 17 missed calls. All from Daniel. Not Melissa. Not my grandchildren. Just him. The first voicemail came through, time-stamped 20 minutes earlier. Dad, where were you? We stopped at the next exit and you weren't there. Call me back. Stopped at the next exit. Interesting revision of events. The second voicemail sounded tighter. Dad, this isn't funny. By the fourth one, his breathing had changed. By the ninth, panic. I didn't listen to the rest, because I already knew what happened. They got home. He walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and saw the white envelope taped behind Linda's old sunflower magnet. The one that said, if I don't check in by 8 p.m., the recording goes to my attorney. Simple. Clear. Irreversible. Let me ask you something. If someone tried to erase you from their life, would you disappear quietly? Or would you make sure they remembered exactly who you were? My phone buzzed again. Call number 21. And the sun wasn't even at its peak yet. By mile 5, the heat turned personal. It wasn't just sun anymore, it was pressure. Like the sky itself was leaning down, curious to see whether I'd fold. My phone buzzed again. 28 missed calls. 3 texts now. Dad, please. Call me back. This isn't what you think. That last one almost made me laugh. It's never what you think, until there's proof. Ahead, I could see the outline of a gas station wavering in the distance, the desert mesa stop I'd marked on a printed map 2 days before we left Indiana. 6.2 miles from the exact mile marker Daniel had pulled over. He chose that spot because there were no cameras. I chose it because I knew the distance. Preparation beats intention every time. My throat felt dry now, but I limited myself to another small sip. Discipline keeps you alive longer than anger ever will. When Linda was in hospice, Daniel barely visited. Always busy, always overwhelmed. But the week after her funeral, he asked about refinancing the house. That's when something shifted in me. Not rage, recognition. If you're listening right now, think about this. Have you ever ignored a red flag because you didn't want to believe it? Because that's how betrayal grows. Quietly, until it's too late. Except this time, it wasn't too late. A third signal bar appeared. The phone rang again. Call number 33. And this time, I let it ring longer before silencing it. The gas station wasn't a mirage. It rose out of the heat like something stubborn enough to survive out here. 2 pumps, a sun-faded Coca-Cola sign, and a low stucco building with dark-tinted windows. By the time I stepped off the highway shoulder and onto the cracked concrete lot, my phone showed 41 missed calls. 41. I didn't rush inside. Rushing suggests weakness. Instead, I wiped my forehead with a handkerchief, straightened my shirt, and walked through the door like a man who had simply taken a long stroll. Cold air hit my skin and nearly made me shiver. The clerk behind the counter, a woman in her early 60s with silver braids and reading glasses hanging from a chain, looked up. You okay, sir? Car trouble? I said calmly. Happens. Not a lie. Just incomplete. My phone vibrated again in my hand. 42. She glanced at the screen, lighting up over and over. Family worried about you? I met her eyes. Something like that. She nodded in a way that told me she understood more than she asked. I bought 2 electrolyte drinks, a protein bar, and asked about the small motel attached behind the station. "One room left," she said. "Cash or card?" "Card." As she processed the payment, my phone rang again. 43. I let it ring all the way through this time, because somewhere back in Indiana, Daniel was no longer confident. He was afraid, and fear changes people faster than guilt ever could. Upstairs in that house, he was probably replaying every word he'd said 5 nights ago. The part about solving the problem, the part about inheritance, the part about me being in the way. What he didn't know yet was that I hadn't sent the recording. Not yet. And the deadline was still ticking. Room 4 smelled like old carpet and window unit air conditioning. Perfect. I locked the door behind me, set my bag down, and finally looked at my phone without moving. 53 missed calls. He broke his own record. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed play on the most recent voicemail. "Dad, please, just tell me where you are." "We found the note. I swear. You misunderstood. That conversation wasn't about you. Not about me." Funny how specific words lose meaning when there's audio proof. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my email. At the top sat a drafted message addressed to my attorney, Karen Whitmore, Merrillville, Indiana. Scheduled send, 8 p.m. Eastern. Attached file. Daniel, conversation, July 5. MP3. All I had to do was nothing. Silence can be the most powerful move in any negotiation. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. The desert stretched endless and indifferent beyond the parking lot. Out there, Daniel thought I was fragile, lost, confused. But right now, he was the one checking his phone every 10 seconds. He was the one calculating consequences. If you've ever been underestimated because of your age, comment where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story is reaching, because what happened next wasn't part of Daniel's plan. My phone lit up again. Incoming call. This time, Melissa. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello?" Silence. Then Melissa's voice, no longer sharp, no longer calculating. "Dad, please." Daniel's losing his mind. "Good." I leaned back in the stiff motel chair and kept my tone steady. "Is he? You shouldn't have left like that. The kids are scared." I almost corrected her. "Left?" Interesting choice of wording. "I didn't leave," I said quietly. "I was left." There it was, that pause people make when they realize the narrative isn't working. In the background, I could hear Daniel's voice, muffled, urgent, asking what I was saying. Melissa lowered her tone. "We panicked when we found the note. You can't just threaten to send something to a lawyer. That's extreme." "Extreme. Planning to abandon your 70-year-old father in a cell-dead desert wasn't extreme. But documentation was." "Did you listen to the recording?" I asked. Another pause. "Yes." "And?" Her voice cracked just slightly. "You took it out of context. Context doesn't change words. It reveals them." I stood and walked to the window again, watching a semi-truck roll into the lot below. "You have exactly 1 hour," I said calmly. "Pack your things. Be out of my house before 8 p.m. Daniel grabbed the phone. "Dad, you can't do this. We live here." "You were guests," I replied. "Guests don't eliminate the host." Silence. Heavy. Breathing on the other end. Then I added one more thing. "If I arrive home tomorrow, and you're still there," I let that hang. "You don't need to shout when you hold the leverage." Before hanging up, I said quietly, "You should have chosen a place with cameras." And then I ended the call. 54 missed calls. And counting. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was worried. Because I was calm. And calm can feel unfamiliar after weeks of tension. At 7:12 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Not Daniel. A notification from my security app. Front door camera motion detected. I opened the live feed. Daniel. Car packed. Boxes stacked on the porch. Melissa pacing. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Just stripped of certainty. He knocked on the door. Of an empty house. I'd changed the garage code remotely at 6:30 a.m. Preparation isn't paranoia when someone already showed you their intent. He checked his phone, probably expecting another call from me. Instead, he got silence. I watched as he pulled the spare key from under the fake rock, the one I'd left there years ago for emergencies. He tried it. Didn't work. Locks had been rekeyed 3 weeks ago, right after I heard that recording. You see, revenge doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be complete. Melissa stepped closer to him, whispering something urgent. He shook his head. Frustration replacing panic. If you've ever had to draw a line with someone who thought you'd never push back, you know how this feels. Not rage, not joy, just clarity. I closed the app because the final part of this conversation wouldn't happen through a screen. It would happen face to face. And tomorrow, I'd be home. The drive back to Indiana felt longer than the desert walk. Not because of distance, because of finality. I caught a ride east with a retired trucker named Bill who didn't ask too many questions. Men like him understand that sometimes silence is respect. We crossed Texas at sunrise, Oklahoma by noon. By the time the flat farmland of northern Indiana came into view, my phone had stopped buzzing entirely. No more calls. No more texts. Silence from Daniel. That told me everything. Either he'd accepted reality, or he was planning something else. When you've raised someone, you never completely stop calculating what they might do next. As we pulled off I-65 toward Crown Point, I opened the security app again. The porch was empty. No boxes. No cars in the driveway. Just the maple tree Linda planted 25 years ago, leaves moving gently in the wind. Bill glanced over at me. You sure you're ready for whatever's waiting? I looked at the house coming into view at the end of the street. I've been ready since July 5th. If you're still listening right now, I want you to think about something. How many times do we tolerate small disrespect because it's easier than confrontation? And what does that cost us over time? Bill dropped me at the corner. I insisted on walking the last stretch alone, because some doors you have to open by yourself. The house stood quiet. But as I stepped onto the porch, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A folded envelope, addressed to me. The envelope was thin, too thin to be an apology. I picked it up slowly, feeling the weight or lack of it between my fingers. No postage, hand-delivered. Daniel's handwriting, still rushed. Still slightly slanted to the right, like it had been in third grade when Linda used to correct him at the kitchen table. I unlocked the door, stepped inside. The house smelled different. Empty. Not dirty, not trashed, just hollow. Furniture gone from the guest room. Closet cleared. Hallway silent. Good. At least he followed instructions. I closed the door behind me and opened the envelope. One page. No greeting. You're overreacting. We never would have actually left you. It was just talk. You took it too far. The kids don't understand why you'd throw us out over a misunderstanding. No, Dad. No accountability. Just justification. I read it twice. Sometimes you need to see the absence of remorse clearly. I walked to the kitchen. The refrigerator looked bare without their school schedules and Melissa's grocery lists. But one thing was still there. Linda's sunflower magnet. He didn't take it. Interesting. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. If he truly believed he'd done nothing wrong, then this wasn't over in his mind. An unfinished pride is dangerous. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Local Indiana area code. I answered. A calm male voice spoke. Mr. Harris? This is Detective Collins. We need to ask you a few questions regarding a report your son filed yesterday. I didn't speak for a moment, because now the game was shifting again. I didn't sound surprised. That's important. Of course, Detective, I replied evenly. What kind of report? A possible missing persons concern, he said. Your son stated you disappeared during a family trip in New Mexico. He seemed distressed. Distressed. That word almost carried humor. I'm home, I said calmly, standing in my kitchen. There was a pause on the other end, papers shifting. You are? Yes. Another pause, longer this time. Well, that's good to hear. He indicated you wandered off on a highway, claimed you may have been disoriented. Disoriented. That was the angle. I leaned against the counter, staring at Linda's sunflower magnet. No, Detective, I was left on that highway. Silence. Careful silence. I see, he said slowly. Would you be willing to come in and clarify your statement? I'd be happy to, and I have documentation. I didn't elaborate. Let professionals ask for what they need. Documentation? He asked carefully. A recorded conversation from July 5th, I said. Discussing the plan. Now the silence wasn't careful. It was heavy. Mr. Harris, are you saying this wasn't an accident? I'm saying, I replied calmly, that I didn't get confused. If you're listening right now, think about this. When someone tries to rewrite your reality, how do you respond? Do you argue, or do you present facts? Come by at 2 p.m. the detective said finally. After hanging up, I sat at the table Linda and I bought in 1989. The house was quiet again. But now, it wasn't empty. It was waiting. And Daniel had just escalated this beyond family. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and old paperwork. I arrived 10 minutes early. Control isn't about dominance, it's about timing. Detective Collins met me in a small interview room with beige walls and a metal table bolted to the floor. Mid-40s, steady eyes. Not the type who rushes judgment. "Mr. Harris," he said, shaking my hand, "you don't look disoriented." "I'm not," I replied. He sat down across from me and folded his hands. "Your son was very emotional," said he stopped briefly on the shoulder for you to use the restroom. "Claimed when he got back in the vehicle and drove ahead, he assumed you were right behind him." "That's interesting," I said calmly, "because he told me, 'You're not my responsibility anymore,' before accelerating." Collins didn't interrupt. "That's how you know someone is actually listening." I placed my phone on the table. "I also have this." I pressed play. The room filled with Daniel's voice from July 5th. Clear, undeniable. Heat stroke, confusion. He wanders. Melissa's voice followed. Nobody would question it. Detective Collins didn't blink. But I saw the shift. A subtle tightening of the jaw. A pen pausing mid-note. When the recording ended, the silence wasn't awkward. It was decisive. "If this is authentic," he said carefully, "this changes the nature of the report." "It is authentic," I replied, "and backed up. If you've ever had to defend your own sanity against someone rewriting events, you know how heavy this moment feels." Collins nodded slowly. "Mr. Harris, why didn't you call for help immediately?" "Because," I said evenly, "I wanted them to show their hand first." And now, they had. Detective Collins leaned back in his chair, studying me in a way that wasn't suspicious, just thorough. "Your son reported you as vulnerable," he said. "Mentioned your age several times." Of course he did. Age is an easy weapon when someone wants control. "I worked 47 years in steel manufacturing," I replied evenly. "Retired at 68 by choice. I still mow my own lawn." Collins gave the faintest nod. "You understand," he continued. "If we pursue this, it becomes serious. Filing a false report. Possible elder endangerment. Conspiracy." I didn't flinch. "I understand." The word conspiracy hung in the air like a slow-moving storm. Because once something leaves the private sphere of family and enters official documentation, it doesn't shrink. It grows. He slid a form across the table. "I'll need a formal statement." I signed it without hesitation. Every detail. The mile marker. The exact sentence Daniel said before accelerating. The distance to the gas station. Preparation wins cases long before courtrooms are involved. When I finished, Collins folded the paper carefully. "We'll be contacting your son." I stood. "Detective," I added, "I don't want revenge. I want record." That part mattered. If you're still here listening, think about this. When someone crosses a line that can't be unseen, do you protect them, or do you protect the truth? Collins extended his hand again. "We'll handle it from here." As I stepped outside into the Indiana afternoon air, my phone buzzed. "Daniel." Again. But this time, it wasn't panic. It was anger. And anger means the story isn't finished yet. I answered on the third ring. "Timing matters." "You really went to the police?" Daniel's voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was sharp. Controlled. The kind of control that comes from feeling cornered. "Yes," I said calmly. "I corrected the report. You're destroying this family over a conversation." There it was again. Minimizing. Reframing. I walked slowly down the sidewalk toward my house, keys in hand. "No, Daniel," I replied. "You destroyed it when you tested how disposable I was." Silence. Then a shift in tone. "Do you have any idea what this could do to my job?" Now we were getting closer to truth. Consequences feel different when they're personal. "You should have considered that on July 5th, I said. He exhaled sharply. "We weren't actually going to leave you out there." "Then why did you?" That stopped him. Because logic doesn't bend for emotion. In the background, I could hear Melissa whispering urgently. He lowered his voice. "Drop the recording. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. If you've ever been pressured to protect someone who endangered you, you know this moment. The pull between blood and boundaries." I unlocked my front door, stepped inside, looked at the quiet kitchen. I won't lie for you, I said simply. You're my father, and you are my son. The line hung there, heavy, permanent. Before hanging up, I added one more thing. I didn't send the recording to hurt you, Daniel. I sent it so you'd never try that with anyone else. Then I ended the call. Outside, the maple leaves moved gently in the wind. Inside, the silence finally felt earned. 2 days later, the knock came. Not dramatic, not aggressive, just firm. I opened the door to find Daniel standing there alone. No Melissa, no kids. He looked tired, not physically exhausted, just stripped down to something raw. You didn't have to do all that, he said quietly. I didn't invite him in. That depends on what you mean by all that. He swallowed, pride and fear wrestling behind his eyes. They talked to me at work, he admitted. Human resources. Asked questions. Consequences had arrived, and they weren't abstract anymore. You told the police I wandered off, I said evenly. You framed me as unstable. I panicked. No, I replied. You calculated. Then you panicked when it failed. That landed, because truth doesn't need volume. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit from childhood. If this becomes official, he said, it could ruin everything. I studied him for a long moment. If you're listening right now, ask yourself this. When someone only regrets the fallout, are they sorry or just afraid? You should have thought about everything when you were discussing how easy it would be for me to disappear, I said. He looked away. For the first time since this began, he didn't argue, didn't justify, didn't redirect. He just stood there. And in that silence, I saw something shift. Not innocence returning, but illusion breaking. You can still fix this, he said finally. No, I replied. You can. And then I closed the door. Because some lessons don't land until the door does. The official letter arrived the following week. Certified mail. Daniel had always hated certified mail. Said it made things too real. I signed for it at the door and carried it to the kitchen table. Same table where he once did homework. Same table where Linda corrected his spelling. The return address read, Lake County Sheriff's Department. I opened it slowly. Formal notice of investigation review. Statement acknowledgement. Advisement regarding potential charges related to false reporting and reckless endangerment. Not an arrest. Not yet, but not nothing. Paper has weight when it carries consequences. My phone buzzed almost immediately after. Daniel again. I let it ring once before answering. They're moving forward, he said, voice low. No anger this time. No pride. Just reality. Yes, I replied. You could stop this. I looked around the quiet kitchen, the sunflower magnet still holding nothing now. You stopped being protected by me the moment you decided I was expendable. Silence. Long. If you've ever had to choose between preserving peace and preserving dignity, you know how sharp that choice feels. I never thought you'd go this far, he said. That's the problem, I answered. You stopped thinking about me at all. He exhaled. For a moment I almost heard the boy he used to be. Almost. This will follow me, he muttered. So will the recording, I said evenly, because consequences don't disappear. They attach. And whether this ended in charges or warnings, Daniel would never again believe I was weak. Not in the desert. Not in my house. Not anywhere. It didn't end with sirens. It ended with paperwork. After reviewing the recording and my statement, the district attorney declined to press criminal charges, insufficient prior record. No physical harm. First-time offense. But the false report charge? That stuck. A misdemeanor. Fines. Mandatory counseling. And, most importantly, a documented record. Daniel called the evening he received the final notice. I pleaded no contest, he said flatly. I didn't respond right away. Sometimes silence forces ownership. They're making me take a responsibility course, he continued, and community service. That sounds appropriate, I said calmly. You're really not going to help me fix this? There it was again, the assumption that I existed to cushion his consequences. I did help you, I replied, by making sure you understand there are lines you don't cross. If you're still here listening, ask yourself this. What would change in your life if people believed you would enforce your boundaries? He exhaled slowly. They're talking about this at work. Yes. Another long pause. I never meant for it to go that far. But you meant for me to go that far, I said quietly. He didn't argue, didn't defend, just breathed. And for the first time since this began, he sounded small, not like a child, like a man confronting himself. Before hanging up, I said one last thing. I hope you learned something from this, Daniel. I already did. And I meant it. The house is quiet again. Not the hollow kind of quiet it was before. Not the tense kind either. This one feels settled. It's been 3 months since the desert. 3 months since the recording. 3 months since Daniel stopped seeing me as someone he could move around like furniture. We speak occasionally. Short calls. Careful words. He's attending the mandated counseling sessions. I know because he mentioned it once reluctantly, like admitting to something unpleasant but necessary. I didn't realize how angry I was, he said during our last conversation. Anger isn't the same as entitlement, but sometimes they grow from the same soil. I still sit at the kitchen table most mornings with my coffee. The maple tree outside is turning red now. Seasons move whether families do or not. People ask me if I regret going to the police. I don't, because this was never about revenge. It was about record, about clarity, about making sure no one ever confuses kindness with weakness again. If you've stayed with me through this whole story, I'd like to ask you something. Where are you listening from tonight? And what would you have done differently? Because these situations don't start in deserts. They start in small compromises, small silences, small excuses. I lost something out there on that highway, but I gained something too. Certainty. And at my age, certainty is worth more than comfort. If this story made you think about someone in your own life, share it with them. Sometimes the quietest lessons travel the farthest. And sometimes, survival isn't about walking 6 miles in the heat. It's about finally drawing a line.